Well, if you hadn't guessed yet, Isaiah 59, 1 and 2 is not an intro to a flowery Mother's Day sermon. We actually had a request last week, about a week and a half ago, to go back and to deal with sin. And I didn't believe that I could cover it in an applicable way within one sermon. So we went back and we spent a little bit of time talking specifically about the struggle of sin last week. We talked about the existence of sin. We discussed how sin is needy or it requires things of us. And then finally we talked a little bit about how sin is that which rewards us deceitfully. So this week what we're going to do is continue on with the topic of what we started last week, since I couldn't cover it in one sermon. We're going to talk about dealing with sin in our life. Now I could have gone back and literally, matter of fact, we could preach this same sermon every week for a month or for a year and really never finish it. So what I did was, as I began to start this, I literally just began to write out issues that we all have, that we know because we can look at the scriptures and that we've all seen prevalent in our lives. And then I also used some of them based on some of the statistics from some of the sites that you can go through. And so that's how I came up with the list of what we're going to look at. Now, as we start to talk about sin, let's get a basic fact down. There are certainly a number of things that take place or will happen to us within our lives that we cannot control. There are sinful situations that may present themselves to us simply because of the world that we're in. And so we start off with, as we talk about sin and sinful situations, understanding that there's a lot of things in life we can't control. But there is something that we can control, and that is how we respond to each of these different temptations or these situations or the trials. And so this week we're going to talk a little bit about sin, but specifically how to overcome sinful struggles. And these aren't struggles necessarily from without, the temptations may be, but really what we're talking about are struggles that are from within. Now, as we begin to get an understanding, we really need to get a basis set. And one of the things we need to realize when we begin to talk about sin is this: we are in a war. And I think most of us understand that. It is not a battle against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of this world. And like any good soldier, we need to know who our enemy is. We need to know what it is that we're fighting against. And so, again, today what we're going to do is begin to look at a few of these so that we can actually have tactics to fight against whatever this enemy is. Now, the enemy is going to vary from each of us. And so we'll go back and look at a few of these. Some of these may not be something that you struggle with now, maybe something you struggle with in the future, or maybe something that you have struggled with in the past. Let's start off with talking about anger or wrath. We're just going to get right into it. Anger or wrath. Now, most of us, I think, understand what anger or wrath is, but I'll try to give you a definition for these as we go along. It's a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility, right? We all know what anger is. Anger, though, is not inherently evil. We oftentimes think that way. There is such thing as righteous anger, and righteous anger would help us to correct injustices. It would help us to turn people back to God. I don't think there's many of us that if we came by and saw somebody, beating up a young child or an elderly person, that we wouldn't stop with righteous anger and stop that situation, right? So we do have times of righteous anger. Listen to Matthew 21. I'm going to read verses 12 through 13. Before I read this, let me give you a little context. This isn't in my notes. If you wonder what's taking place here, we're all familiar with Jesus flipping the money changer tables. You may not have any idea why he did that. When you came for the Passover feast, you couldn't take your money, you couldn't use Roman money or money, let's say you came from Egypt. You couldn't use that money there at the temple. So you had to exchange that money for the Jewish coin. You wouldn't think that's a big deal, except you had people charging usury, sometimes excessive amounts of usury. So it'd be the equivalent of I gave them $1 worth of Egyptian money, but I only got back in return, let's say, 60 cents of Jewish money because they kept theirs. You guys see what I'm saying? They were stealing from their own brethren. Listen to his anger that we have here. Righteous anger. And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and said unto them, It is written, my house shall not be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. So not only were they charging usury for money, they were also, most people aren't going to travel from Egypt or wherever and bring their animals for sacrifice. So where did you have to buy it? At the temple. You don't think they marked up the prices just a little bit to rip their brothers off? Of course. And you see righteous anger. I know it's righteous because Jesus never sinned. As a matter of fact, you'll find that noted in Hebrews 4:15. So certainly there are times when anger is acceptable, but I would say in most of our lives, that's not what we normally find taking place. Normally, what we find when we start talking about anger is it's unrighteous anger. So when exactly is it unrighteous? Well, it would be unrighteous if it's directed at something that is not unjust. How many of you guys have seen where people have been out, for example, holding signs? I'll just pick something at random. For example, saying, stop abortion. And somebody will physically assault them because they disagree with it. They're angry at the fact that they're holding a sign. Do you think it's okay to murder innocent children? I don't. Why is the person so upset? They're angry. They're angry at something that's literally just, right? That's unrighteous anger. Another example would be when somebody becomes really angry over trivial matters. Have you ever lost a video game or been playing a game with somebody and you lost and you got really upset? It's unrighteous anger. How about if you went to Bigby's and you ordered a beverage and when you showed up, they have your white mocha chocolate, whatever it is there, but do I look like I drink white mocha chocolate? No. I tell the lady or the man, I ordered a black coffee. That's all I got, right? But how often do I actually interviewed a lady last week, said that she was leaving the food industry because I can't say that place. At the restaurant she worked at, people would physically assault them. They would spit on them because their orders took too long. Or unrighteous anger, right? And we might say these are extreme cases, but how many of us have seen it and how many of us are actually guilty of it? There are times where we simply get angry and we don't know how to deal with it. And I was mentioning to Jerry this week and some others, since COVID has been in place, I've worked at my secular workplace for 3 years. This last year, the amount of anger, resentment, hatred towards people has been excessive. And I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's the stress, but lately I see a lot of pent-up anger with people. Another example would be if you were wishing somebody harm or suffering simply because you don't like them. How many of you guys have ever seen somebody treat somebody bad simply because they're upset with them or they don't like them? That's a physical manifestation of their anger. They're literally they're carrying it out on this person. So what do the scriptures really have to say about this? Listen to James 1:19. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, to anger, right? There are times where things are going to happen to us, and we may have no control over it. But we do have control over how we respond to it. Am I going to get angry and fly off the handle? Am I going to react a little bit different? Guys, I'm going to be the first to admit here, as I get older, I get better at this. I used to be very bad at this. I'm just going to admit, I was a hothead. We learn as we mature in our faith. Ephesians 4:26 and 27. Be ye angry and sin not. Remember I said anger isn't necessarily inherently evil. You could be angry and still choose not to sin. But we learned something else here. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. How many of you guys have been angry with somebody and just let that anger go on for weeks and weeks and weeks, right? I'm not talking to them. I'm not going to have anything to do with them. We learn here, one, our anger is not to cause us to sin. And two, it's to be dealt with very quickly, right? You have an issue with your spouse or a friend or whatever, that needs to be resolved quickly. If you don't, the anger is just going to continue to build. We've all been there. We've all done it, right? I was angry 3 months ago. I didn't say anything about it. I let it build. I let it build. I let it build. You guys know what happens? All of a sudden, my socks aren't folded the correct way in the drawer, and I explode because I didn't say anything. I just let it build for 3 months. We've all seen it. We've all done it. Proverbs 15:18. A wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. So what do we do to fight anger? Well, like any passion or emotion, the very first thing is we have to get control over ourselves and not let the emotion control us. Very easy for us to allow our feelings to begin to take over and to give an unwarranted response or to seek revenge. When really what we ought to be doing is what we would want someone to do to us. Love us enough to show just a little bit of mercy. Now, we have to think of it like this. If I'm supposed to imitate Christ, don't I need to forgive people? If I was the lady at Bigsby who accidentally served the whatever that was messed up wrong, do I want people to give me a little bit of mercy and just a little bit of forgiveness when I've messed it up, as opposed to them spitting on me and screaming? Does that even help? No. We want people to deal with us the same way that we should deal with them. And so I'm going to overlook the vanilla, mocha, whatever. Yeah, I'm going to be late for work probably, and I'm just going to wait on my black coffee, right? Sometimes, though, the anger is not over something trivial like that. Sometimes the reason for anger is because we have a matter of sin between us and another fellow Christian. Well, if that's the case, it should be resolved between Matthew 18:15 through 17. I'm not going to go back and cover all of that. We've covered it in detail, but I'll break it down in a nutshell. Here's what you do. You go to them. You try to resolve it first between you and them. And then you take a few more with you to hear every word. That's not to have your back, give it to them. That's there to listen, to make sure that you're not being inappropriate in the way you deal with them. They're not being inappropriate, to see if there's a remedy between the two. And if the person, whoever it is in sin, still refuses to remedy the situation, you're told to tell it to the church. It becomes a public matter for whoever it is that's in sin. But that's how you're going to deal with that. If the person in sin is not going to resolve the matter, guess what you now know? At least you now know they don't want to resolve the matter now. If they decide they want to, I'm ready to forgive them, and I'm in a position to do such. But I can simply go on and I can let the matter drop, right? I'm not saying I'm still in fellowship with them or anything. I'm saying I don't have to struggle over dealing with it anymore. They've made it clear that they're not going to resolve the situation. Now, I'm not suggesting the situation's dead. It may have to be dealt with in a few more ways, but I don't have to stress over it anymore. I don't have to be angry about it. I don't have to let it have dominion over top of me, right? Forgiveness and mercy, that's really the perfect response anytime we begin to get angry. And again, I mentioned this week, I've noticed a few at my workplace that I've never seen anger before, but as of recently, I've noticed a lot of hostility. And I mentioned it to them, and you know what they said? You're right, I have noticed that I've been much more angry than I have been normally. Why do I bring that up? It's not because I'm hammering on COVID. Sometimes in our lives, we get so overburdened, we literally are so stressed, we don't know what else to do but to lash out, okay? That's going to happen. Sometimes it's going to be from us, sometimes it's from others. We have to have a little bit of mercy. Guys, I want you to remember when Jesus was suffering his death, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Sometimes we're in a position where we can give somebody a little bit of grace. We have to imitate Christ. We have to bring the same mercy that he would give to us. I'm not suggesting he gives me a pass. I don't think for a second if I was doing something wrong or if I was acting a certain way that Christ would just give me a pass. But how would he deal with me? That's what we have to think about when we're dealing with anger. And you guys know it, holding on to grudges really just leaves me a slave to all the anger and the pain and whatever it is that I'm dealing with. So here's what I need to do first. If I've got a problem with anger, I need to admit it. I need to admit it. I need to come up with some type of a plan to remedy the situation. Sometimes there's a plan outlined in the Bible, such as Matthew 18:15 through 17. Guys, sometimes it could be so bad that I may need to literally seek some type of counseling. It could be from a minister. It may be a different type of a service that I might need to go for, counselor. And let me say this, if you find yourself in a position looking for counseling, there's very good counselors, and there's counselors that aren't worth anything. Be very careful who you go to for counseling. But it could be that bad. You may have constant rage problems. I'm not going to go into this. Guys, you could have constant rage problems, and it may be something chemical, right? I'm not going to go back and address that. There may be other things you need to address, okay? So I'm going to move on to the next one. How about greed? Greed's something I'd say all of us have dealt with, and all of us have at some point probably been guilty of it. It's an excessive desire to acquire or possess more than one needs or deserves, especially with respect to material wealth. I'm not suggesting that you cannot have a a collection of Coke bottle caps in your house, right? Oh, he's got a greed problem. He's constantly collecting bottle caps. I'm not talking about stuff like that, okay? Although that could be a problem. Think about the world that we live in. We live in a very materialistic world. Have you guys ever noticed that life is all about collecting stuff, getting stuff, having the best stuff, the newest stuff? That seems to be a very common theme within the world we live in. And people, rather than loving God and loving their neighbors and being thankful for the few things that they have sometimes, are extremely greedy, and they literally let the love of money or the love of things take over their life. How many of you guys have ever watched those hoarder shows? It's amazing. It's amazing what people will do, and there's always an issue behind it. But they have literally allowed it to dominate their life. They have allowed this greed, this covetousness, literally to just dominate them. Listen to Luke 12. I'm going to read verses 15 through 20. And he said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesseth. And he spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? Let me pause. This guy has got so much stuff, he's saying, the problem is I don't have enough barns to put my stuff. I could have more stuff. He keeps going. And he said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater. And there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? Greed has caused an awful lot of people to sin. A lot of sins have been related to greed itself: stealing, cheating people, dishonest business practices, people not giving of their means on the Lord's Day, and the list would go on, right? Including even our time, right? Somebody has asked me to come and to help them do something. I have the ability, I have the time. I'd like to stay home and watch some reruns of Voltron or something like that, right? I'm not going to help them. I'm greedy with my time. So greed begins to consume our lives, really. It can be consuming too much in excess. Here's an example. If there are only 2 pieces of pecan pie left, you don't have to eat both. Avery, I'm going to apologize again. I could leave, knowing someone likes the other pecan pie, you can leave the other pecan pie, right? If you only have one TV in your house, everybody likes to watch, somebody wants to watch Rawhide and someone else wants to watch Chips. You can allow them to watch their shows too. We don't have to just watch Rawhide, right? Why do I act that way? Well, I'm greedy. I'm greedy with my time, and I'm greedy with the use of the TV. So we're going to watch what I want to watch. And I'm trying to put this in basic aspects. We do this all the time, and we all know that we do it. What does the Bible have to say about greed? Mark 4:19. And the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches, talking about greed here, and the lusts of other things, sometimes it's not just material things, it could be something else, enter in, notice this, choke the word, right? They cause us to ignore the word, and it becometh unfruitful. Well, how could greed cause how could it choke out the word? I know I shouldn't steal, but my greed chokes out the word. I know there's all kinds of things I shouldn't do, but my greed will cause it to choke out the word. Luke 16:13. No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Now, I don't go around when I'm at Wendy's and the lady says, can I have money? And I say, you mean my mammon? We're talking about wealth. We're talking about material things. That's an old word, an antiquated word. But we're talking about wealth or abundance, right? And for many, it's become their God. You can't serve God and material or wealth, right? If you've got to pick between the two, you can't go in halfway with any of it. You're either going to just forget God, and that's all you're interested in, and that's going to drive your life, or you're going to choose God. You can't be a servant to both of them. Proverbs 11:4. Why can't I be a servant to both? It's not logical. Proverbs 11:4. Riches profit not in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivereth from death. I can't take all that stuff with me. I could have the most bottle caps in the world, an awesome collection of bottle caps, and when I die, guess what? It's the same thing that Jesus said in the parable. Somebody else is going to get your stuff. It doesn't help you. All that greed, all it did was allow you really to waste away your life. So then how do we begin to fight against greed? One of the things we have to do is we have to keep things in perspective. You always hear people say, keep things in perspective. No, I mean literally keep things in perspective, right? I have a 2005 Dodge minivan that I drive. I like it a lot. It drives good. Would I prefer maybe a really, really nice car, something exotic? Not really my style. Maybe more of like a 68 to 72 Chevy pickup, more my style, yeah. I would like that. I have to keep things in perspective. It gets me from point A to point B. I don't have a payment on it, other than the quart of oil that I use every so often. But it works good, right? So I have to keep things in perspective. There's no point in me becoming greedy over personal possessions. And literally, you may be saying, so how do I fight greed then? Well, the virtue to counter greed would be this. One of the easiest ways. Give liberally. Help out people when you can of the things that you currently possess, that you're able to deal with. You know, I'm not suggesting that if someone says they need a car, that I'm responsible to go out and buy them the newest Ferrari or whatever, right? But maybe they need some flour. Maybe they need food, whatever it is. If I have it and I have enough to share, one of the ways I deal with greed is literally learning to give to people that which I have maybe a little abundance of. It's pretty hard to be greedy when you're helping other people out and giving to other people. Now, with that being said, because some people will take this the wrong way, I think we all know that wealth and possessions really are blessings that we have. We use them for a number of things to provide for ourselves, for our families. We should enjoy them while also at the same time staying detached from them, right? We don't want to get like the guy who says, man, I got an awful lot of stuff, but I could build bigger barns. And guys, let me tell you this. In my life, I have had multiple size garages. You guys ever realize that the amount of stuff I have usually depends on the size of the garage I have? And you guys probably fall in the situation, where do I put it? I'll stick it in a box out in the garage, right? And I have a basement. We accumulate and acquire stuff, and we don't even realize it, right? So we have to stay detached from them, right? We need to focus instead on giving away what we can and helping others, realizing that they're just things. We don't want to become like those people that have a hoarding issue, right? If I'm sitting in my house and I can literally, and I need a plate or a bowl, you know, I should have to go to the kitchen for it, not just reach over there and grab it, right? It becomes a problem. Let's deal with one that nobody really wants to talk about. Why am I going to use it? Well, because statistically speaking, it's an issue. We touched on it a little bit. Lust. Let's talk about lust. I can't really devote enough time to this, but we're going to touch on it. What is lust? Well, it's the inordinate craving for or indulgence of the carnal pleasures, specifically related to things of a sexual nature. As you know, I did not come up with that definition. I took that straight from Merriam-Webster to give you an idea of lust. Okay? Things usually of a sexual nature. Now, let's say this. Sexual desire in and of itself is not sinful. I have to say that because there are a lot of people teaching a lot of unusual things, and they give a very dirty view to sex and things of a sexual nature. Desire in and of itself is not sinful. As a matter of fact, we know it's a blessing between a husband and a wife. But what we're talking about is lust, and lust is specifically craving or acting out beyond that which is lawful. So let me begin to break it down a little bit. Really what we're talking about would be somebody fantasizing sexually or desiring another person. I think we know what lust is, okay? Here's the thing, though, and people don't look at it this way, but we're going to try to break it down somewhat logically. When you or anybody begins to objectify another person for your own sexual pleasure, lust has taken over. And let me say this, aren't we supposed to treat everyone like a brother or like a sister in Christ? And if they're not a Christian yet, aren't we to treat them as somebody that we would hope would be a brother or a sister in Christ? Let's just go there for just a second and say, how in the world could we have a thought process about somebody who should be a brother and sister in Christ or is, and have those types of thoughts about them? Now, logically I can say, and we know it's illogical. Will it happen? You've heard me say before, a woman could be dressed in a snowsuit from Alaska with park all the way up, and all you can see is her face, and people are still going to be like, oh, man. And it's not because she's dressed improperly, it's because that person has a problem with lust, okay? So when we begin to look at someone and begin to objectify them for our own sexual pleasure or needs, we've got a problem with lust. That is the complete opposite of loving somebody. And I think we get that. And let's take it another. Imagine what those people would think if they actually knew what you were thinking of them. Imagine how Jesus would think, like you don't think he knows. How do you think Jesus would feel about you lusting after somebody? Here's the thing, and I mentioned earlier, sexual desire in itself is not bad, and yet it should lead us to being a complete gift of self in context of marriage. What I mean is we're saving ourselves and those desires for marriage, and or I'm saving them for my spouse to whom I'm currently married to, right? If I spent all my time thinking about other people, other women, how much time do you think I'm going to have to devote with those types of thoughts or whatever interactions towards my spouse? I wish I could spend a little more time talking about that. There are a lot of people who they will spend up all of their energy and interest regarding things of an intimate nature before they ever get back to their house. People they work with, people they're around. We'll touch on that here in just a second. Guys, the world has severely distorted the whole aspect of sexual purity. What does the Bible say about it? Matthew 5:28, "But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." Same thing would go for a female who was, looking at a male in that type of way. Guys, remember I said sometimes these things just happen. You may be out and you don't even expect that to happen, right? Sometimes, though, you're literally looking for that type of thing. 1 Peter 2:11, he says, "Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul." Guys, this is a physical battling against a spiritual battle. Now you may say, why is lust so bad? Well, we've mentioned mental desires may lead us into physical sin. Listen to 1 Corinthians 6:18. "Flee fornication." Let me pause. Do you think that person just walked out of their house and the next, an hour later they walked back in and went, how in the world did I just fall into fornication? How did that happen? It doesn't happen like that. What's it start with? I guarantee you lust was involved if they're committing fornication, right? It doesn't just happen. We can't always stop the events or the situations that come up about us, but we can stop or deal with how we deal in return to those. He says, flee fornication, right? Don't mess around with something like that. "Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body." Let me break it down a little bit. We'll try to address everybody. Okay, so you got a problem with lust, and you're not married. What could that lead to? Fornication, right? Let's say you have a problem with lust and you are married. What could that lead to? Adultery. For anybody of any age, let's say you have a problem with lust, and statistically speaking, according to the statistics, I'm not going to give it because it's really bad. The numbers are gravely high that there are over half the congregation in here has at one time this month looked at pornography. Guys, the world we live in is saturated with impurity, with the way they have dealt with the whole issue of desire and sex and so forth. And I bring that up because that wasn't the intent behind it. So many people teach so many distorted things. I'm going to go over to Hebrews 13:4. Listen to regarding marriage here, because the world oftentimes tries to make it sound like sex is just a dirty thing. Sexual desire and intimacy between spouses is not only lustful, it's a righteous act. It's perfectly fine between spouses. Hebrews 13:4, "Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed," that word is koite. That's where we get our word coitus from. It's talking about the physical relation between a husband and a wife. "And that act is undefiled," right? There's nothing that will defile you about that at all. "But whoremongers and adulterers, that will defile you. God will judge." We need to go back and remember the very original intent and purpose of those desires. Now, you've got a lot that will teach that sexual intimacy is only for procreation. Guys, the Bible does not teach that. It doesn't teach that anywhere. A lot of people think that that's the only purpose for relations within marriage. It's for procreation. Go back and read Song of Solomon. You're going to learn really quick. The Bible doesn't teach that it's only for procreation. Intimacy within marriage is for being a complete gift of yourself to your spouse, and it may result in procreation, but it is not the only purpose of that act. It's to keep the marriage bond like this. And if a marriage bond is like this, there's a less likely chance that one would be going out and would be tempted to have lustful thoughts. Now, with that being said, do you think that's going to stop it? No. It's not going to stop it completely, right? It'll help, but it's not going to stop it completely. So how do you fight lust if lust is something present in your life? Well, again, one of the first things you've got to do is you've got to start trying to control your passions rather than allowing your passions to control you. We're going to look at this a little bit logically here. You've got to recognize that the gift of both the desires and what those desires are leading you towards is, again, intimacy with your future spouse or intimacy with your current spouse that you have. Other ways of going and fighting this would be, first you have to be willing to admit it to yourself. That's the very first step of any of these issues we're talking about. Admit it to yourself. Then you need to have some type of a plan on how you deal with the fact that you're struggling with lust. What could some of those things be? Well, here's one of the things I would know. If I'm struggling with lust, there may be certain books I ought not to read. I've never bought one. I'm kind of intrigued now. Maybe I will. You guys ever read romance novels? I never have. Some people do. Why do they read them? They're buying romance novels for a reason. It's to incite that mental thought process, right? That's usually more of a female thing. Males, they may be buying material they're not really reading it. They may be buying other material that's inappropriate, right? Does it stop with reading materials? No, how about movies? There are probably certain books I ought not to buy, certain movies I ought not to watch. And guys, I've already mentioned this. There are times where you're going to see things you didn't expect, right? How many of you guys have walked and you went, holy moly, that person has virtually no clothes on, right? And you may say, well, that's a guy thing. I don't know. It's very possible my neighbor across the street, although I think he's in his 60s, he could be in his jeans with no shirt on and he works out all the time. And there might be ladies in the neighborhood going, sometimes we don't expect these things to take place, but they do. How many of you guys have been on the second floor of the mall? There's a lady there that has a store. I think her name's Victoria. Last time we walked through the mall, there was a picture that was 45 foot by 50 foot, and you know what? I leaned over and I said, Alec, look the other way. And I didn't just mean him look the other way while I went like this. I looked the other way. I looked the other way. Here's what I'm saying. Whether you're a female or a male, learn to bounce your eyes. Turn your eyes. Don't look. You may say, that's really simple. No, that's the easiest thing to do. Quit looking, right? If I'm we have a dress code at work, but sometimes people don't necessarily, they've had to send people home. You know, if I'm going over to look at some parts and I get over to press 8 and I'm going to come back to press 8 after I go to the HR department, right? Learn to bounce your eyes. Don't look at those types of things. Know in advance not to buy those types of things. And if you have a serious issue with this, you may need somebody to help you be accountable. And if you're here, let me say this. If you have an issue with this, I don't care who you are, send me a text. I can send you a link of an online program. It doesn't cost any money. It is a biblical program. I would say it's very good. There's going to be one thing here or there that I might not agree with. But if you have a problem and you want to do something where you have accountability and you're willing to do the reading, they've got Bible verses, send me a text. Let me know. I would send it to you for free. What am I saying? Admit you have a problem. Make a plan to get around that problem. This is going to be the same for anger or anything else. And begin to avoid the situation, okay? Why? Because I don't want to be a slave to those things. And I know, guys, while I was preparing for this, I went in and studied, and there was a guy who was saying, I have a problem with lust. And he said, specifically, mine's on the computer. And he said, I will find that I got on the computer for 5 minutes, and I will realize I have been on there for 5 hours. Why? He's become a captive to his own lusts. If you want to stop that, you've got to find a way to overcome it. Let's talk about envy for a little bit. You guys are like, I'm glad we're off that subject for a while. Let's talk about envy for a few minutes. You may be saying, well, I don't know that envy's a problem. Probably has been for all of us at one point. The definition, it's a feeling of discontentment, resentment, aroused by and in conjunction with desire for possessions or qualities of another. Guys, this is really bad because we are to want the good of other people. We are to love other people and be proud when they have these great qualities. Our goal should be really to do good things and to want good things for our neighbor, not to walk around being sad that I don't have what they have, right? Or not being jealous that I don't possess the qualities maybe that they have. Envy is a very lonely sin if you begin to think about it. It's really, what's envy focused on? Me, right? The world needs to revolve around me. I should have it. I want it. I'd like to be like that person. It's a very self-focused problem, right? Why can't I have it? Why did they get it? You can see real quick how somebody could very easily get entrapped by envy, and yet kindness and desire for good things of other people, and that's what we should want. That's really probably the only cure, right? We have to begin to grow in our love for other people, be thankful for what they have, be proud of them for what they have accomplished, even if that means that we don't necessarily benefit, or even if it means that we don't have that, right? There are a lot of things that there are people here in the pew are exceptional at that I am not. And I'm willing to admit that. And there's some things I'd like to be much better in, and I can get better in those things. I don't have to simply be jealous because somebody here can do something so much better than me. If needed, I can ask them to help me do a better job. That's one of the ways I can help begin to get over envy here a little bit. What's the Bible say about envy? Let me give you a little context as to what's going on. You guys will recall in Corinth, I'm going to go over to 1 Corinthians 3:3-4. You guys remember in Corinth, they abounded in miraculous gifts, right? It caused envy, right? I can speak in tongues, all right? So what? I can interpret. They all had these gifts, right? People were becoming envious of one another, right? I got a better gift than you got. Listen to 1 Corinthians 3:3-4. For ye are yet carnal, whereas there is among you envying, right? They're envying over gifts, and strife and divisions. Are ye not yet carnal, and walk as men? For while one saith, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are ye not carnal? I mean, they were even preacher followers, right? They had serious problems with envy within the congregation. Let me ask you a question. Could you be a faithful Christian and not be able to speak in tongues? Yeah. Could I be a faithful Christian and not have the gift of miraculous healing? Yeah. Could I be a faithful Christian and have been taught the gospel by Paul and not Apollos? Yeah. All of this envying, it makes no sense. It's just not logical, right? I may envy somebody else because of certain traits that they have. Can I be a faithful Christian without those traits? Well, depending on their traits, but yeah, it should. How about if I envy them because of the way that they dress, right? I'm not as maybe snazzy of a dresser as some people, and I might envy the way they dress, but can I be a faithful Christian even if I don't have quite the curb appeal as they do? Yes. It's not logical, guys. 1 Corinthians 13:4. Charity or love suffereth long and is kind. Charity, love, envieth not. Love vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. Guys, if I'm envying all the time about other people, I have a problem, and part of that problem is the way that I'm loving other people. Right? Listen to James 3:14-16. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. There isn't any room in my life to have envy if I want to have a joyful life. And we know that constant envy leads to really constant disappointment with our current positions in life, maybe our current possessions in life. We become slaves to the fact that we're always wanting something better, or we're wanting something that somebody else has, and really it makes us lose our peace. And not only that, we can't have joy and abundance for them. We can't celebrate because other people are being blessed because we're so jealous and envious of what they have. Listen to Romans 12:15. Tell me if you could do this while you're jealous and full of envy. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. If somebody were to go out and to buy a new house, and it's an awesome house, and it's more awesome than your house. Does anybody use the word awesome anymore? And it's more awesome than your house, are you going to be like, oh, they got the most awesome house and I don't have it? Or are you going to be happy for them that they were able to go out and to buy a new house? All right? If you want a new house, work hard for it. We're going to touch on that here in a minute. So how do I deal with this? Well, first, if I've got a problem with envy, I need to admit it. And again, I need to find a way that I can overcome it. And I can't see that envy would be so bad that I would need counseling, but usually the first problem with envy is I'm just not willing to admit it, or I don't even realize that I have a problem with it. That's really the first step. Let's talk about alcohol for a few minutes. I can't go back and spend a lot of time on alcohol. If you are wondering about this topic, I have preached entire in-depth sermons on it. So I'll just touch on it here for a second. This is probably one of the biggest sins. It's been around since forever. You go back to Genesis 19:32 and 33, you're going to see an account there where Lot is intoxicated. So intoxicated, guys, I don't even want... He's so intoxicated he has relations with his daughters and doesn't even know it, right? He's passed out intoxicated. And they're thinking the end of the world basically has come, and so let's just take advantage of him while he's intoxicated. Why did I go to that passage before we even get into this? Have you guys ever noticed there's some awfully bad things that happen when people become intoxicated? Things that we would be like, that's one of the most horrible things I've ever thought of, and yet doesn't seem so bad when you're intoxicated. So this has been a problem forever. Now, let me start off by saying this. Today, most people talk about alcoholism, right? And you've heard people say, well, alcoholism is an illness. It is in the sense that you have to approach it as an illness, but it's not an illness in the sense that cancer is an illness. If alcoholism is just a total illness, it's the only illness I'm aware of that you can carry around in a bottle in your pocket. Now, am I saying that there's not going to be trials and that it doesn't have effects? No, I'm not saying that at all, and I'll touch on that here. Alcohol is a choice. Let's get that straight through our head. Same as drug abuse. Am I saying people can't be addicted to drugs? Not at all. You can be addicted to drugs. Can you be addicted to alcohol? Yes. Who makes the decision whether you're addicted to pornography, alcohol, drugs, I don't care what it is, stealing? That is a choice. And alcohol in particular is one that you have to choose to literally ingest into your body, okay? Let's not use the term alcoholism. Let's use the biblical term, which is drunkenness. Now, I don't have time to go back and spend much time on this, but if you've never listened to a sermon on alcohol, go back and look up the Greek word methuo, or the verb associated with it. Muthaskos, I think, is how it's actually pronounced. I didn't look it up or write it down. That word of drunkenness is never discussing an end process. Let me say it this way. Drunkenness is not what the state of Michigan says is when you're drunk. Is that 0.08? 0.08? I think it's 0.08, right? Some would say, well, you're drunk at 0.08. That's not what the Bible teaches. Drunkenness is a process. It's not an end result. You look up the Greek words, drunkenness is a process, and it starts with the very first drink. The very first choice you make to start to pour that into your body. And you may say, that's not the case. How many of you guys have ever seen someone who drinks alcohol? With the very first drink, what begins to take place? Their inhibitions begin to lower, right? Some people begin to get upset. Some people really begin to get giggly, happy. That's because the alcohol is immediately beginning to soak into their bloodstream. It's intoxication in process. It's not to the point at which Michigan would arrest me, but it is intoxication in process, okay? And from when I took my counseling, I'm not going to go back and touch on this. I may be a little long today. When I took my counseling, let me explain something to you. You can be an alcoholic and you can drink every day, all day long. Or you can be an alcoholic and only drink once a month. You may be saying, what? It all depends on whether or not you can't stop or overcome that need to drink. And there are a lot of people who fall into the category of alcoholics who have fought it for years, and maybe they only drink once in a while. I'll give a personal case. My grandfather was an alcoholic. I didn't realize when he got back from World War II, he drank a lot to deal with. He'd killed a lot of people. He told me his last week he struggled with it, and I didn't know this until after he died. But my mom told me that he went to counseling and he had quit drinking. He would have one drink of alcohol. He would have one shot of whiskey every night. That's all he had. And a lot of people would say, if you only have one shot of alcohol a night, you're not an alcoholic. Was he an alcoholic? Yes, he was an alcoholic. He was an alcoholic through and through. I hate to bring that up about personal family, but he probably, if he was here, he'd shake his head, because he tried to help people through AA when he was alive, even though he still dealt with the issue. For many, it's a secret sin. We don't tell people. We don't tell people because, one, we know what they would say about it, and two, it's shameful. So for many people, they do this in secret. They keep it quiet. And each instant is sinful because, again, they know exactly what they're doing, those who are struggling with this issue. And each time it violates the will of God. I mean, what does the Bible have to say about it? Listen to Romans 13 through 14. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and in drunkenness. That's that word I was talking about with you, methuo. Not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ. Hard to do that when you got a cold cores in your hand, isn't it? Hard to put on Jesus Christ when you got a Killian's in your hand. And make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. Guys, we always look at lust as being purely sexual. You could have a guy who literally is more excited about his alcohol than he ever is about a female down the road. Galatians 5:19 through 21. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these. We touched a lot of these, and we're going to touch quite a few of these today. Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. You can tell Paul wrote this. Got a comma here. Heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. The sin of drunkenness is just like many of these other sins that we've looked at, whether it's wrath, theft, fornication, adultery. All of these sins, I think people probably would not do them if they were of sound mind. And you may say, well, how bad could it really get? How many guys have ever known alcohol to destroy a life? I only stopped for 2 drinks, but I accidentally ran into a family of 6 on the way home from church, and now I'm guilty of manslaughter for a family of 6. I'm 20 years old, but I'm going to jail for 6 counts of manslaughter. All because I started to have 2 drinks. How about this? I went into a bar, I was going to have 2 drinks, and my marriage has not been very good, and before I knew it, I found out that I was in an adulterous relationship. Alcohol makes people do things that they would have never done when they were in their sound mind. So what do I do if I'm struggling with alcohol? First thing is this: admit it. Admit it. Clean it. If you've got alcohol problems, clean out your house. You don't go to places where alcohol is served. I'm talking even restaurants, until you can get to the point where even it's okay to sit in a place like that. You don't associate with the friends that you used to have or that you currently have that drink. You don't go to their house. You don't do any of those things that you used to do. One of the things we learned when I took my counseling classes, one of the best things you can do if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, pack up your stuff and move somewhere to a new city where you know nobody. Nobody. Because they're not showing up with a 6-pack at your house to watch a movie. You start over fresh. And I'm not saying you just show up and you have no plan. You have a plan. Most likely, you're dealing with alcoholism, you need counseling. You need some type of medical assistance. It could be an actually inpatient recovery. And again, I've told you there are good counselors and bad counselors. Be careful where you go. Worldly counselors, they're going to use worldly techniques. When I deal with people with alcohol, first thing I tell them is this is a choice. You know it's sinful. You know it's sinful. It's a choice. That's the very first spot. Now let's begin to deal with the temptations. That's the second part, right? How do you deal with it? There's a lot of different avenues when you're dealing with something as strong as this. If you're here and you're dealing with something like this, the same place that I know has an online free course for pornography also has an online course dealing with alcohol. If you're having a problem with this and you don't want anybody to know, or you don't even want to tell me, say, hey, can you send me the source for whatever that online source was? You don't even have to tell me what you're dealing with. I will send it to you. Most likely I would ask you to come and talk with me because I could help you out. And there's a lot of other things that people are addicted to and are struggling with. If you're having an issue with it, please let me know. I can help you out. Let's talk about laziness for a few minutes. I'm making fairly good time. What's being lazy? For anyone who's here who does not know what being lazy is, It's the quality of being unwilling to work or use energy or being idle. That's the Merriam-Webster dictionary. How would I say it? It is the reluctance it's doing everything with reluctance or being slow about everything if you do anything at all. Maybe that's probably the best way to say it, right? And we were actually joking about this at work. Somebody was making a joke about, how do we get people to come back to work? We're struggling with this today. A lot of people are struggling with the fact that we can't get people to come into work. And you may say, well, and it's not just that. There are people in general that just do not work, right? I do a lot of the training within our facility, my secular workplace, and somebody will say, do you think they're going to come into work? We've had people that they will show up, the guys, they work till first break, and then you hear this. I left my prescription in the car. I left my inhaler in the car. I just need to run to the bathroom. And they're gone. They're gone. Larry, I see Larry back there laughing. He's seen it on the assembly line, right? I left my inhaler in my car. I just need to get it. They don't want to work. They don't want to work. And this is prevalent really today. So am I only talking about that? No, I'm not. This could be a lot of different people. This could be the stay-at-home parent who's not working as they ought, right? Remember, you guys have all heard the old joke, she just sits back and eats bonbons all day, right? Or he just stays home and works in the garage all day. I say that because I have to be an equal offender. I had a buddy who he put his wife through school, actually before they were married. He put his soon-to-be wife through school. She took an engineering job, and he stayed home with the kids. He's like, I get to go fishing every day. So it's not just the women. It's not just the women. He's like, all I got to do is suffer 4 years of work, put her through school, and I get to fish every day. But for him to do that's not right. He's made an agreement to stay home and to work around the house. How about people who are working in a secular workplace? You've got people in the secular workplace, they're not doing what they ought to, right? They're not working as hard as they should. It doesn't just go there. It even carries over into the work of the church. How about the lazy preacher? You guys have all heard the lazy preacher jokes, right? Well, guess what? They're not all jokes. I know some. They don't study during the week. They don't prepare sermons. They don't prepare Bible studies. They're lazy. Same thing, I've seen Bible study teachers at church. They show up and they're like, today's lesson is going to be on, it looks like today we're going to cover anger. You know what I know? He didn't even look at it. He didn't show up prepared. Same thing with song leaders. Some song leaders go out of their way and they pick songs based on things. Some have actually tried the songs in advance. Some don't. They literally come in and they're like, that's the one we're doing today. They're lazy. So it carries over in all aspects of our life. And guys, let's not say, wait a minute, I don't lead song, I don't preach, or how many of us do evangelism? How many of us should do evangelism? Every one of us. Are we lazier than we should be? A lot of times. What does the Bible say about laziness? Romans 12, 10 and 11. Be kindly affectionate. I can see my last page of notes, guys, so I'm almost done. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another, not slothful in business, right? Lazy, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Let me read to you 2 Thessalonians 3:10. It says, for even when we were with you, this is Paul talking to the church there in Thessalonica, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, let me go somewhere real quick. Would not work, not cannot. There are people in this life that cannot work. They need assistance. That's why we have government assistance. There are people that cannot work. And then you've got people who won't work, right? That's what Paul's talking about. If any would not work, guess what? Neither should he eat. I feel the same way, right? If you're able to work and you refuse to work, you probably shouldn't eat. Listen to Colossians 3:23 through I'm going to just read verse 23, but if you go over to Colossians 3:22, he's talking about obeying your masters, and he says, not as I please, or not with eye service. What's he talking about? Larry will know this one too. Anybody who's worked in a manufacturing, but I'm sure it happens even in every public workplace. It could even happen in the house, right? You're over here and you're like, so anyways, I was talking to Joe over there. You see your boss come, right? You quit talking, right? I wasn't talking to anybody. I wasn't goofing off. Then you start doing, that's eye service, right? That's what we're talking about. And it happens. We all know it happens. He says, and whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. Yeah, my boss is a man. I need to act like I'm actually working for the Lord and not for my boss. I'd be a little less likely to be like, yeah, I did hear that. I'd be a little less likely to gossip and do all that stuff and actually work like I'm supposed to, right? So it doesn't matter whether I'm working at my house. It doesn't matter whether I'm working in a manufacturing facility. It doesn't matter whether I'm working in a restaurant. It doesn't matter if I cut grass and plow snow. I should work, and I should work hard. And that's one of the things people ought to know about Christians. We would be blessed if everyone said, oh yeah, he's a Christian, hire him. Why? Because Christians work hard. They're hard workers, right? They work like the Lord's watching them. Just imagine if you're over on the assembly line and Jesus is looking over your shoulder going, the quota is 323, but you're only on pace for like 180. I'd be like, man, I better kick it into gear. Jesus is watching me, right? That's how we're supposed to work for all of our work. It's not hard to understand. It's hard to do. But here's the thing. Hard work is completely fulfilling. And guys, there is honor in hard work. Whether you're wrenching on a car, whether you're working in an assembly line, whether you're serving food, doesn't matter what you do, there is honor in hard work. Let's talk about pride. That's my last one. I may be a little long today. Pride. What is pride? Having an excessively high opinion of oneself, right? This is the most dangerous sin out of all of them because it's the root of all other sin. It's really the excessive love of myself, right? If you know a prideful person, they're probably like this all the time. Man, I am so great, right? That's what prideful people are like. And it's the rejection of God while we make ourselves basically our own gods. It's living a lie. We see ourselves as responsible for everything that is that we do. Now let me say, are we responsible for much of what we do? Yes. But you wouldn't even exist on this planet if it weren't for God. And you can't do anything in and by yourself. So you need to have an understanding of that. The very reason you can breathe and do anything is because God allows you to breathe. Try to keep things in perspective here. And the virtue of humility recognizes our place as we stand before God. I may have the awesome 1985 IROC Z and I got the cool jeans rolled up and I think I'm all that, but guess what? I'm nothing in the sight of God. I may be prideful about the stuff that I have and may think I'm all that, but I'm not. Right? What does the Bible say about pride? Philippians 2:3, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, that's empty pride, but in lowliness of mind, we're talking about humility, let each esteem other better than themselves. Galatians 6:3. For if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. Guys, that's allowing pride to cause us to be deceived. James 4:6. But he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Pride is incompatible with God's mandate for love. And pride, guys, is destructive to relationships. And that's because it's the complete opposite of loving people the way we've been told to love them. Let me put it this way. If I am prideful, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, if I'm a prideful person, I probably do not love my spouse the way that I ought to love my spouse. I probably do not work to the extent that I ought to work. And I probably have a number of issues. So how do you fight it? Well, I think it goes back to the same idea that we had with money. It's impossible to follow both ourselves and Christ. Something's got to give. Something has to give. And so I really need to begin to pray for humility. I need to be able to admit I have a problem with pride, pray for humility. I need to embrace really every opportunity to be humble. And what does that mean? That means oftentimes I've got to lower myself above where I think that I am because I'm a prideful person and help people, do things for people, realize that I'm not as great as I think that I am. What I really need to do is to realize that I'm weak by myself and that I need God. I need God's mercy. I need His salvation. That would help a person who's prideful put things into perspective. When you think you are all that, remember this. You're still reliant on the Lord's sacrifice for you to be found righteous and be saved. That might help you put things in perspective if you're prideful. You're going to have to remember that, again, this world is not all about you. You need to be pointing people to God while at the same time trying to be in alignment with His Word. And I know that we didn't cover as many things as we should have today. We did cover anger, we covered greed, we covered lust, we covered envy, we covered alcohol, we covered laziness, we covered pride, and that's just a few. Like I said, we could have preached on this every week for a year straight and never covered them all. And you may be sitting here and you're saying, but you didn't cover the one I'm struggling with. Let me read you one more passage, 1 Corinthians 15:34. This is for all of us. Awake to righteousness and sin not, for some have not the knowledge of God. I speak this to your shame. That was kind of what I had in mind as I wrote the bulletin article. We sin when we're not knowledgeable of God's will. Now, there are some who are knowledgeable of God's will and they simply refuse to adhere to it. But usually we sin when we're not knowledgeable of God's will. So what do we need to understand no matter what our problem or our struggle is? We need to know His Word and we need to keep it. Is that simply enough, knowing His Word? Well, knowing His Word and telling someone to keep it is a great benefit. As we mentioned today with a number of these issues, you may need additional techniques. You certainly are going to need some form of accountability. You may possibly need counseling. You may need other self-help resources. But the first thing you need to do is admit you have an issue with whatever the sin issue is. You need to set out a plan to overcome it, and then you simply need to get to work. Now, as I end this sermon and we're talking about having a plan, let's talk about the plan of salvation for just a second for anybody watching this. It's not hard to be saved. If you go back, many call it the plan of salvation. Some call it the steps of salvation. I don't call it that. I'll call it the biblical accounts of salvation. Go back and look what people did to be saved. It wasn't hard. They heard the Word. Faith comes by hearing, Romans 10:17. They believed Jesus Christ was the Messiah, John 8:24. If you don't, you're going to die in your sins. And they had faith, Hebrews 11:6. They knew, because how destructive sin is, they needed to repent of it. Jesus said so, Luke 13:3 and 5. Paul teaches that in Acts 17:30. So they knew they needed to confess their sins. They knew they needed to repent of their sins. They knew they needed to confess Christ, Romans 10:9 and 10. They knew they needed to be immersed in water, and that's what we find in every conversion account. That's what Jesus teaches in Mark 16:15 and 16. Peter taught it there in Acts 2:38. Paul teaches it in Galatians 3:26 and 27, Romans 6:3 and 4. Peter teaches it in 1 Peter 3:21, and the list goes on and on. That's how people became Christians, not complicated. And then what's the hard part? Dealing with the issues we talked about today. Dealing with all those issues. And yet you have to be faithful so you can stand before Him at the judgment. 2 Timothy 4:7 and 8, Revelation 2:10. If we can help you today either to become a Christian, or if we can help you today in any way by maybe offering prayers on your behalf, you can come forward as we're led in a song of invitation.